Morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time you're tuning in the program called What's Going On FlintTalkRadio.com. I'm George Moss, the host of the program, and we are delighted as always to have you out there in the viewership and, believe it or not, in the listenership. But the viewership is first order because a lot of persons used to come in here and they would be surprised when I would tell them there's a camera in here picking them up on the in the viewer aspect, and they couldn't believe it because we have these small cameras in here. they said there's a camera in here, and they couldn't believe it. But now we have these cameras in the room all over the place, and I noticed they over here today. They're on this side of the studio, and I want to also commend those who are working very hard to make the studio look a lot more up to the standards of the major studios in the country. I'm talking here about the national networks, and we're beginning to look more and more like those studios on the national level because we have a new table in here, and I noticed that the designs in the room are different. We have pictures in the back there on the sides, and just growing by leaps and bounds. Going to have air conditioning put in professionally in the room where we tape, and working on things upstairs as well. So we are just growing, and want you to stay with us and grow with us as we begin to expand what we do here, and want you to let us know how you feel about what we do, and that you will in fact give us your input. And we also want to invite you to continue your support as usual. I'm going to talk about three topics today. The one that I was speaking about last week, which is the taxes, I'll save to last, because I want to talk about two other topics first. Although on the taxes, I'm going to say some things that no one else has said, and I want to bring a different way of looking at it that has missed, I think, the ones that have not thought about how we think about even the word taxation. And so I'm going to make a few points that may be a little bit challenging to the very idea of what that is. I'm going to distinguish that from something else because I think it's been mischaracterized, and I'm going to try to put it into a perspective that would make it clear that maybe we need to look at the whole issue a little bit differently than we look at it. And I'm going to try to redefine what it actually is. I was doing these kinds of things, by the way, when I was in my economics. I had one of my masters in economics, and while the teacher's up there in the front of the room teaching, I was always back in the back of the room writing down some other ways of looking at what the teacher was talking about. And I have always been one of those kinds of students that always wanted to try to find another way of looking at that which is being taught from, I guess, from a point of view of what had been taught to that person who taught it, who was taught it by the person that taught them, and then pass it down until I got it in the classroom taught by that particular individual. And I can remember distinctly in high school in Mrs. Smoot's class in 10th grade, I was always raising my hand to ask if I can go to the board and work and work the problem out a different way. And we had a student teacher in the classroom, and the direct teacher would be in the room also, and they both would say, "Moss, you can't do that problem a different way." And I go to the board and I would show that it could be done a different way. I wasn't too popular, and I wasn't being a smart. I just wanted to try to think of it in different terms. And also I have to say I like the idea of people in the classroom calling me professor. At that time, I was in Professor Moss because I was a raggedy kid, and I compensated for it by studying my lesson so I could be the best in the classroom. I was going to be number one in something. I couldn't be the number one best dresser. So when I get to the last of our three topics today, I'm going to try to bring in something that will change the way we look at the whole issue of taxation, because I think it's been mischaracterized, and I'm going to try to characterize it in a different way and try to heal the popular point of view. And this would be a first. We haven't done it anywhere else. Maybe some private conversations, but never before on any airing of this idea has it been taken up? And I think you'll see the novelty of it once we get to that part of this discussion, this conversation this afternoon. The first thing, though, I have to talk about, which I wrote about this morning, and I got up early this morning to type out my Facebook post. I did a post on the great film by Dinesh D'Souza. The second film he put out, a documentary called America, What Would the World Be Like, is the question he's raising. What would the world be like if there were no America? What would this world then pretend? What would its existence be? And what D'Souza does, and I think this is part of his brilliance, is that what he does is that he, first of all, without interruption, is that he gives the view that's been imported into our conversation, national conversation, by some of the progressives that are taking over really on these college campuses, and the view that they've been promoting for a generation now. And it is clear what has happened in the country and why we are now mouthing anti-American views that have been mainstream. It is very clear now, how that happened and also why it happened. This film makes it clear, but it's been clear for a while, but it brings it out dramatically on screen in terms of how that occurred. And what D'Souza does in his brilliance was allow the naysayers to have their place in the sun, to put across their point of view before the viewers of this film and let them speak for themselves in terms of how they see America. And these are not peripheral figures. These are people that are in the mainstream. And you think of some of the persons that were part of the conversation on that film. I'm talking about people like Noam Chomsky, Michael Eric Dyson, Ward Churchill, and probably the one that was highlighted most because of the influence of his writings, probably one of the most influential persons in terms of the writing of history, I should say the rewriting of history, who is Zinn, Howard Zinn, and his book called A People's History of the United States. And Zinn's book, as I said in my article this morning when I wrote about, when I tried to do a critique of this film, I said that Zinn's book, whenever you see these college professors writing and putting the word people in the title of the book, A People's History of the United States, you can read that pretty much as hiding the term that they really should use, which is a proletariat history of the United States, because what is hidden behind the facade that is just about the people is the fact that it's polemic against the capitalists who are not people, and it is a way of concealing what the intent of the book is, which is to take down the people that made this country great, undermine their integrity, and then say that the people need to have an understanding of history that is removed from the point of view of history that is in fact put out by those who would have us to believe in something that is not truthful based upon that which occurred. Of course, they're writing the truth, and there are no distortions in what they write. So D'Souza sits down in interviews and asks loaded questions and let them then speak for themselves. And each one had grievance. Michael Eric Dyson's grievance was, of course, the the enslavement that occurred in the United States, which is a flaw on the character of the country. And there was a Hispanic American or a Native American. Let's talk about the Native American first. There was a Native American, and the argument there was that Columbus should never have come because the Indians were in fact killed off by Columbus. And of course, Columbus never put one foot on the shores of the United States, what later on became the United States. But try to tell that to people out there that are saying that he came on the shores and all of a sudden the Indians started getting shot down, and before you know it, we're taking the land over and no more Indians, 10 little, 9 little, 8 little Indians, and then one little Indian boy that was left. You know, we sing the song as children because we were beginning to embrace that assumption without knowing that's what we were doing. And so the grievance there was that the settlers came over, took the land, decimated the Indians, genocide against the Native American population, and so that's that point of view. And then the Hispanic point of view was that the whole Southwest was Mexico, and it would be much better off if it had been left in the hands of Mexico. And what we did as imperialists was take the Mexican land, and that's why the United States was able to expand through the Louisiana Purchase and westward movement, the Polk's War in 1845 to 1848.
I'd like to know this, though. If that's the case, and why was there, if it was just a thing of imperialism, why was there more defenders in the Alamo were actually Hispanics than there were whites?
And that war was a war of independence from Texas because we were fighting against the Mexican tyranny.
And another thing is, too, the Mexican government at that time was not per se really Mexican. They were from a colonial power anyway in charge. We fought against the colonial power as well. Mm-hmm. You know, the defenders of the Alamo, or the fighters, or the insurrectionists, whatever you want to call it, they were fighting against the colonial power. They were themselves. I mean, Santa Anna was not, I think he was from probably Spanish. I mean, you know, I didn't go to it, but I mean, to me, he sounds a representative of the colonialist government of Spain in Mexico.
Yeah, Texas was fighting. What the Alamo was about was the fighting for the independence from the tyranny and wanted to join on to the United States. We were doing the same thing in that war that we've done in a lot of the wars, where we've tried to come to the rescue with no appreciation on the other side of it to those who were the tired, the oppressed, the whole masses, which we invited to these shores. But also we went to their shores and tried to bring about liberation in other parts of the world. It hasn't been perfect, but the world is not perfect. And we don't demand perfection of any other country in the world but our own. And that's why we have these critiques being made by the Noam Chomskys and the Howard Zinns and the others who want perfection from this country but expect it nowhere else and demand it nowhere else. Don't critique it anywhere else. It's singular to the United States. And de Sousa sets them down to allow the viewers to hear and be invited into the conversation and to hear what they're saying so that we can get an understanding of what they are teaching on today's college campuses and why so many people are beginning to come out with these accusations against the United States, and the conversation has now been changed to the country that has given the world so much is now being seen as a country that is in fact taken everything from the world while giving nothing to the world of any consequence. In other words, the story has been reversed. And so after then you bring the Hispanics in. The Hispanics are saying that the Southwest was taken through imperialism. You bring the Native American was saying that those four presidents on Mount Rushmore, is a reminder of the imperialism and how it is painful to have to see those pictures up there on Mount Rushmore, and the country would have been a lot better off if the Europeans had never come. And of course, we look at, he showed a picture of Manhattan and showed that Manhattan is a place that has all these structures on it, where in the past, when they sold the land, Manhattan was sold for blankets and other trinkets of trade, with the Native Americans, by the way, thinking they got the better of the deal because they knew they could take the blankets with them, but they didn't see how you could take land away anywhere. And so this idea they were getting the worst of the deal was because they did not understand the concept of land ownership that had come with, that the Europeans had brought with them. They thought that the land was viewed the same way they viewed land, which is it's there, it's always been there, it's going to be there tomorrow. So why not trade the land when I can still come on the land tomorrow? But it was not the idea that they had. And when they ran up against this idea later on, it caused a conflict. But the trade was in fact done by what people saw on both sides as their mutual interest. And so that was a point of view that was pointed out first of all. And what he's doing in the film is done so brilliantly. He's showing each group that has its own grievance. And then what he does is that he then comes behind the grievance to then put another historical understanding in place. And it is I didn't think he could do a better job than what he did in his Obama's America 2016, which came out in 2012. I didn't think he could actually do anything better than that, but people were telling me that this film actually exceeded what had been done 2 years ago when De Souza had put the film out, I think in an attempt to influence, similarly to what Michael Moore did when he made his film right before the election in 2004, trying to influence the election, the re-election of George Bush. And I think De Souza's movie in 2012 trying to influence the election in 2012 because it's his view that 4 more years of the President Obama would be a disaster, which it has been. The first 4 years were a disaster, but people were blaming it on Bush. But now there's not Bush's fault because we can see clearly now there's not Bush. We're now in the second phase of what has been a disastrous administration. And many people are now saying, one person texted me yesterday and said that he just heard about a report that said that Obama is the worst president since World War II. And I texted back to him that when I first saw that report, which was at least a week ago, I wrote and said that I don't think that report goes far enough. I don't think we're talking about the worst president since World War II. I think we're talking about the worst president in American history. And we got 2 more years of this. But after putting on the screen those who would put down the country, what Dinesh D'Souza does is go back over the same history and lay out another narrative that has been dismissed by the narrators we have today that are forming much of the way in which this country is viewed today. The progressives have, in fact, taken over, and they did it. And what they're doing is that they're doing it deliberately. They understood in the 1960s that they couldn't overthrow this government by going out there. I mean, Bill Ayers tried. You can't bomb a couple of buildings and overthrow anything with the Weather Underground, and you're going up against an apparatus of the magnitude of what is offered and put together by this country. You can't do it that way.
Oh, by the way, I stand corrected. Santa Anna had been with the Spanish for a while, and then he later on switched sides, fought for Mexican independence, and then he got elected, I think, 11 times, as it was saying in one of the places, not Wikipedia, I checked out, it was from the PBS, the site. They got elected 11 times or on and off different over periods of decades as president of Mexico. But I don't think they actually gained their independence until much later from a European overlord, basically, or overpower. So I'm not totally mistaken, but I mean, it's kind of called, I mean, I'm not an expert in Mexican history. But another thing is I'd like to make the point, continue with your Bill Ayers. I mean, Bill Ayers, he talks about, the consumerism, and he's against capitalism. Years ago, he was on C-SPAN book notes, and he was at his office in the University of Chicago, and he was talking about he's got a home in suburban Chicago, a suburban area of Chicago, and then he and his wife also had a place on the West Coast. So, I mean, isn't that kind of interesting? A man who opposes consumerism, and what does he have, to take part in a commune and just goes there and, they can sit there and do chants and beat bongo drums, to keep up with this appearance that he really wants to eschew material gain and possessions. Mm-hmm. He's a hypocrite from beginning to end.
No, without any question, and still very dangerous. They had a wonderful series of programs on Bill Ayers and Bernadette Dorm, his wife, on Megyn Kelly's program on Fox this last week. I thought she did a brilliant job of bringing him in. Because it was because of the D'Souza film that the discussion came back up, because D'Souza and Bill Ayers have been debating each other, have debated each other on occasion. And to bring him in with this film coming out was very appropriate, and allowed the public to again listen in on this voice, of which Ayers was saying that he could not say that he would not bomb this country again. And Megyn Kelly wanted to pin him down. Well, what would make you bomb the country again? And of course, he wouldn't say what those circumstances would be, but he couldn't guarantee that it would never happen again. But he is 70 years old now, and so that hopefully that maturation process would have kicked in. But he's still as radical as he's ever been. But they understood they could not win by being out there. Writing books about kill your parents and things like that, which they claimed that would be the most revolutionary of acts. In other words, kill the past, kill that which has nurtured the present, and then we go from there to what's the word they're using now, to fundamentally transform America. So the idea is to eliminate the past or to rewrite it, and that's what we see going on. And so D'Souza's film is an attempt to do a rewriting of that which has been rewritten. And I think the job is done brilliantly, because he goes to each of the grievance centers and examine what their accounts are of slavery, for example, of the notion that there was genocide against Native Americans, all of the imperialism of America in terms of fighting wars in order to get control of resources, which is the view that most have of American imperialism, and a view that is in fact taught at various universities, if not almost all of the universities in the United States, certainly a large number of them, that America is an imperialist country. And of course, the film makes a point that at no time has America fought a war and had any territorial claims upon the resources once the war came to a close. I mean, we fought the Iraqi war and then turned the oil fields back over to the Iraqis. Imperialists don't do that. And the idea that we took the land from the Native Americans and they were in fact killed off in order to acquire the land, which is what Bill Ayers said on Megyn Kelly's program, and in the debate with D'Souza, that also cannot be sustained. What D'Souza shows in the film, to his great credit, is that when populations meet each other and they're not inoculated against the diseases of the group that is, we're not talking about zillions of people coming over, we're talking about the ones who are the adventurers coming over. They are bringing with them diseases that they've been inoculated against where they come from, and they're putting these diseases now in a place which does not have any experience of those diseases and have not built up any immunity over time to resist those diseases. So in the interaction with the Native American population, they're bringing diseases on the shores that had not been seen before, and there's no inoculation. It spreads in epidemic. Now, anybody talking about killing off, it's 80% of the Native Americans that were killed off, that were killed off in the Western Hemisphere, but nobody talks about how it was that 1/3 of the population was in fact eliminated in Europe during the Black Death, and no one claims it was a result of Asians committing genocide against Europeans. We recognize it for what it was. It was the fact that the rodent infestation, those ships of trade were infested with rodents, and those rodents came into the European theater, and because of the sewage systems that were, I run into those sewage systems now, but they were primitive like that back in that time period in Europe, and because of the sewage that was in places there where sewage ran down the streets and things of that sort, it incubates a rat population and all the diseases that they brought, and wipes out, over a period of time, wipes out 1/3 of Europe's population. No one says that that's because of the genocide practiced against Europeans by Asians.
Yeah, they make it sound like it's so deliberate, and then that doesn't jibe with the idea that they didn't find about the idea of germs until maybe in the middle Victorian era, when Ignaz Semmelweis discovered, his discovery of, simply having people wash their hands after examining cadavers and then coming in and deal with pregnant women and the rise of pudendal fever. These guys who are studying to be physicians were just coming from the cadaver room, not washing their hands, going to examine their patients, and there was a rise. And that was in the Victorian era. So I mean, to say that we had this knowledge that we acknowledge at one point and it's go on for 75 to 100 years and that's back again, just asinine. I mean, in my opinion, I mean, it wasn't. We didn't simply know. I mean, it sounds like we should have known. Maybe it was good hygiene practice to wash my hands. I think I would have, but then again, I grew up in the era after that, so that was common knowledge for us. But I mean, to say it was like a deliberate act, I think is really, really, really stretching it.
Yeah, the way we learned that story was through the John Wayne pictures and the cowboy movies they made, where we just saw the guns being fired and Indians falling off their horses in the movies, and it makes an impression. If you don't know what the facts are, then that is the thing that, I mean, Hollywood then just started this narrative yesterday. If we go back to look at the programs on television and the movies that were made, because we like westerns coming up, and they were the movies. I remember my teacher, Miss Johnson, telling us in class one day, "You all like westerns." She was telling us she liked love stories, and here we were in the classroom. I think that was like in 6th grade. We've been in the classroom saying, "Yuck," what's that? Love. We scatter girls. But our thing was cowboy pictures and western movies, and we spent our time on Saturdays in the movies watching Gene Autry and anyone that was over there shooting those cap pistols. It looked like they were actually winning the land on the battlefield. But that's the distortion that we got from Hollywood, and I think that was somewhat deliberate in terms of the way in which the history was supposed to be viewed of America. But it wasn't an all-out assault. But it created, I think, to some extent, the 1960s radicals, which were coming out of the energy also of the civil rights movement, where blacks out in the streets, and we got Bull Connor out there with his clubs and fire hoses being put on children and dogs being put on people, and then this narrative that people have come up with. It just showed that the narrative had to be true, because why is this going on right now? And so there was this grievance, but they found out in being out there that they couldn't win that way. And so they had initially put on clothing that was to distinguish them from their parents. They were not wearing business suits. They were not wearing new jeans. They were wearing holes in their clothes and things like that to reject that point of view. Had their own drugs, and wasn't so much drinking beer. Didn't care anything about Bud Light or whether Bud was heavy or not. or who Bud was. What they were doing was it was a counterculture, and as a counterculture, they had their own drugs, and the idea was, and also free flow sex, make love, not war, and war was what is it good for? They were rejecting the way in which society had organized itself, and they wanted to organize it different. They wanted to fundamentally transform America. Now, where did I hear that? But they couldn't do it that way. And so they took off over a period of time. They went, first of all, got their credentials. And if you notice that those persons that's in front of the classroom right now look like them, wearing jeans and tennis shoes. I wonder why is that? And you don't see them too much dressed in terms of the attire prior to the 1960s, where they look more businesslike in the classroom. Now, it's like the dress of the 60s once they got inside. But many of them put on business suits and understood that if they were really going to influence the government, they had to become the government. If they're going to influence the what is taught in the classroom, they have to then be in the classroom teaching. And it's not an accident, I don't think, which was pointed out in Megan Keller's profiling of these radicals today, like Bill Ayers. It's not an accident that his wife, Bernadette Dorm, is teaching at Northwestern University, and guess what she's teaching? She's teaching law at Northwestern University. And here are people that bombed the country and were in the forefront of organizing the Weather Underground, the Wellerman organization, which was an anti-American organization, bombed the country on, I think, 20 occasions. I think it is one count. And they're now in the university. I mean, why? And what is that about? And have they changed their mind? And what they're telling us in these interviews, that no, they have not changed their minds. And that's why it was important for them to put on the screen that point of view, which goes unchanged. I mean, the grievance is still there.
Well, I'd like to know this. If this such a country is so god-awful and so oppressive, why weren't they annihilated? I mean, if you were in any other country and opposed the government and do the actions they did, you never even heard from them again. You've been in some spot in an unmarked grave somewhere or incinerated. Mm-hmm. I mean, and this man enjoys great wealth. He gets published, he gets accolades, he gets public appearances. Mm-hmm. He's teaching continuously. He owns 2 homes in this dreaded United States. I mean, shouldn't he feel horrible that he actually owns property that might have been originally owned by Native Americans? I mean, where's his guilt coming at? It's very convenient, isn't it?
It's very convenient. And you mentioned the point earlier when you said they're hypocrites, because one of the person in the film was Michael Moore. And I don't think you can get more hypocritical than Michael Moore, who was always talking about, he was quoting the film from a piece he did in a PBS movie on poverty in America, and they brought that quote into the Sousa's film. And there's Michael Moore decrying capitalism, and then he says the word, I will cut to the chase and use the word for it because I can go and call it what it is, greed. But I guess he gave his money away to charity. He's not greedy. There's no greed in the $50 million that he allegedly has in his checking account. But greed is what the other persons did. And supposedly the greed kept others from being greedy and kept others from being able to accumulate any wealth because they have it all. As if you can hoard all the wealth by stealing it, and no one ever catches you at it.
Well, Michael Morris claims he doesn't invest his money; he just has it in the bank, and it's gaining the interest rate. Well, which is okay. If he's so concerned about the poor, the best way to get people from being poor is to give them a job. The best way to do that is to invest in something. If he doesn't find a group that's actually doing things he wants to invest in, why doesn't he create something and invest some of that money in that, and where it can have a payoff for everybody?
John,
why doesn't he have that?
You're making a great point about these hypocrites. Elizabeth Warren, for example, is in the film, and her she's a parrot. the senator from Massachusetts, and I mean this woman, you can't, who is she doesn't know even what her own identity is. She thinks she's Native American one minute, then she's not. Whatever she needs to be at any given point in time, that's what she is. And in the film, given the comments that she made, what she was in that case was a lunatic. What she says in the film, in a segment in her living room, where she was talking to a group, and she wanted to remind everybody of something we've heard Obama say, is that nobody is self-made. And she wanted everybody to know that you didn't, those of you that created a business, those of you didn't do it by yourself because you used the roads to build it, and you used what other people had paid for to make it happen. There were schools that were teaching things. You used those persons in the so you owe something back, is the idea. So you owe taxes. That's the idea. And they never raised the question of, since you didn't create anything on your own because of the roads, it raised a question that I raised in my article, which is why then hasn't Elizabeth Warren and people like her use those roads to create anything themselves? What has Elizabeth Warren created because we have roads? And what has Obama created because we have roads? This idea that you don't create anything because there are roads, okay, there are roads out there for them too. And let's look at what they've created. And can we just get to that conversation, which somehow gets left out, as if you don't bring anything to the roads that that was not there because everybody contributed to the roads. It's like, for example, the land is there, Manhattan is there. But the reason why you have the buildings there is because someone had the entrepreneurial skills to put something on top of Manhattan. Look at Manhattan when the Native Americans had it, and then when they sold it, S-O-L-D, I didn't say stole it, when they sold it to the settlers, then look at Manhattan today and look at it in the premier time. That way, those of you who are claiming that America took land from Mexico, what De Souza says in that film is very, very important, very interesting, if not key to the film. He said that he showed the land over here in this part of the in America, and then showed Mexico in Mexico. He said that many Mexicans would have hoped that the whole of Mexico would have been taken over. I mean, given the development in both places, I mean, I don't see any Americans breaking the laws of Mexico to get into Mexico. And look at how many persons are coming this way, although we now know they're not all from Mexico. Many of them are from Central America, and I'll name the countries there: Costa Rica, El Salvador, and Honduras. I mean, I've known that for a while, that this idea there's all Mexicans coming across the border. But how many Americans are breaking into Mexico? They're coming this way. And that's because of the fact that, yeah, you have roads, they have roads elsewhere. I've never been in a country that didn't have roads. With that, I mean, what do they have in other countries? Just trails? That would be impossible, wouldn't it? Just for a country not to have, you got to have some kind of pathway, because you can't get anywhere if you don't have roads. So even if it's just a little pathway, it's a road.
Well, they probably don't have the interstates like we have, but let's face it, that wasn't originally an American idea either. The Germans had that with the Autobahn. Eisenhower saw that when he was a general over in Europe, and basically created that here.
That's right.
And if anybody sees it, every so many miles, a stretch of the interstate, it's got to be straight away, and like a mile stretch or whatever, so they can use it as landing strips. Mm-hmm. It's the gas stations and refueling places. They become refueling places for the military apparatus. The whole thing is for national defense, just like it was in Germany. So
you correctly stated that the highway system is an Eisenhower. Something that Eisenhower brought on the shores of the United States, and we have all these connecting highways because of the efforts at that time. But what's on the side of the highways is not the highways. It's something that's added to it that is an addition to. And you just can't claim that because you have roads, then this will automatically happen with nothing being added to it by those who brought the things that happen off the roads. And so they want to act like the capitalist class are just these people are predators, and that you just can't. Why aren't they in jail if they're predators? I mean, this idea that's been refuted by Bertram Bertram Fulton, who wrote the book on Roosevelt, and also got a book out called The Myth of. He wrote a book about the myth of the New Deal, and now he has a book out called The Myth of the Robber Barons. And this idea that people were just stealing from people and they just took and took and took, and nobody ended up in jail, but they just were taking wealth from people so they couldn't have any wealth. And that's how they got wealthy, because they were just simply stealing other people's money.
The only thing I can say that I got a slightly different view. I can say that the robber baron concept, the idea of that, actually is more of an example of corporatism, where they actually did have enough money and power to influence government and get them in their hip pockets to do their bidding. I can see that, but to say that they totally rob people, okay, how can you rob people of a potentiality they didn't recognize, or there's unintended consequences nobody would realize? I mean, it's like, going back to the time we come onto the shores and we killed the natives here because of the diseases we had. It wasn't our intention to do that. I mean, let's face it, if you just want to look at the most pernicious terms, if our intention was to enslave the native population, to ship them off to slaves, why would we want them dead? We wanted them living so we could put them on boats. That was our intention.
Yeah.
So,
well, I want to refer to two people in that conversation, John, one of whom is Stefan Molyneux, and I want to also reference Ludwig von Mises. The politicians will eventually come into the fray, and they will, in fact, take advantage of that to their own political benefit. But the politicians are generally come lateless. Yeah, they're going to use the corporate structure to their political benefit. But what Mises says is that the reason why this energy is created in the United States to the exclusion of other parts of the world is because the politicians got into it last. In other words, once it is off the ground, then they see an opportunity here, and the politicians will get into it because that's what politicians do. They take advantage of anything that will enhance the extension of their power, the maintenance of their power, and then the extension therein beyond where it is at a certain point in time. They'll always seek to grow their power and use whatever instruments they have to do in order to bring that about. But in the formative state, you do have these persons here who are industrialists and pioneers and entrepreneurs and capitalists who want the government to, in fact, practice laissez-faire, which is what in France they had told the treasurer under Louis XIV, vos laissez-faire, leave us alone. And that's what they were asking for. But how do you leave them alone if they're successful? You certainly can't leave them out there because of the influence they'll have that will, in fact, subordinate the influence of the politicians. So they will, in fact, come into it at a certain point in time. But to say that they were robber barons and that's how they accumulate their wealth, I think is a misunderstanding of it based upon how it is now being viewed by those who are rewriting history to make it appear that the capitalists are. You see, corporatism is different from capitalism. And this, by the way, the idea that you can have what they call, what's that word they use? Because I always try to use capitalism with it. They want to use crony. Yeah, crony. They they want to use the word crony capitalism. You know what? That's corporatism. You can't have crony capitalism, and because crony capitalism is corporatism, where the both groups are scratching each other's back. The politicians get something out of it because they can hold the corporations, make them beholden to the politicians, make sure they give them money in their coffers for their campaigns, and the corporation wants something out of the deal because if you're going to feather the cap of the politicians, obviously you're not doing it out of the goodness of your heart. You're doing it to some extent because of force, but you want something out of the deal as well. And you know what? That allows us to go into this second topic. As a matter of fact, I'm not finished with that, but I need to talk a little bit about these other two topics before we get off the air today. The second topic that I wanted to discuss, I think, kind of ties in and is in fact interface with this conversation about how politicians operate. And what I want to talk about was something that is a breaking story in Mississippi. It's going to be interesting to see what they do about it. I'm going back to the Thad Cochran campaign. Because, John, did you read this? Are you aware of what is breaking in the Thad Cochran campaign now with this minister by the name of Felder? Jim, what's his first name? Anyway, Reverend Felder is the person I'm talking about. He's come out, they call it sour grapes, saying that he, along with other black ministers, were paid a certain amount of money, or promised so much money, but paid a certain amount of money, which they then paid to those who went to the polls, the black Democrats, which is what they were. We just can't believe black Republicans are standing in that line voting for Thad Cochran. Otherwise, would have voted for him in the original primary and not in the runoff that occurred 21 days later. But he now is coming out because of sour grapes. He didn't get the money they promised him. And he came out, and he's coming out saying that the Cochran campaign offered and did pay thousands of dollars to black ministers to lead their congregation to the polls to vote, to which they were going to be passing out money in envelopes to those voters once the verdict was in and that Cochran had been installed in office.
Now, which party did this? The Democrats or Republicans?
This is Thad Cochran using black Democrats.
Okay, see, that's kind of fitting, though, because that's kind of a history for the Democrats to be very abusive of, and to be very corrupt with the, it's a fact. I mean, it's been more proven. It's like washed under the rug, or this is kind of a side joke, but the Democrats have used money and that kind of element and voting for dead people voting for them for decades now. I heard about it, I heard about it when the Kennedy election, when he ran against Nixon in Chicago. Mm-hmm. It's been proven time and time again in Detroit. The Democrats do it. So, the only thing that I see that they might be getting ticked off about is the Democrats might be getting ticked off at is they're taking a page from their book. It's like, it is a form of plagiarism. If we're going to come up with a different way to corrupt the system, do it differently. Be unique, be original.
Yeah, Cochran is despicable because he played the race card that's been played by the Democrats for years, ever since 1965, where the Democrats had to hide their hand and act like it was a Republican Party that was in fact keeping them from voting in the South, and it flipped the script and rewrite it so that now the Republicans are the racists. They're the ones that were keeping blacks from voting for people like George Wallace and Ross Barnett and Orval Forbes and sheriffs like Jim Clark and others, every last one of whom was a Democrat. But the history has been flipped, and so now the racists are Republicans and the Tea Party, and that's exactly what Cochran, who's a Republican, who prior to this campaign they were the bad guys, and now the Tea Party's up there, and they can now switch in. The Republican Party can now become the Democrats, and with the caricature of them being the racists, and now the Tea Party is taking on the Republican role as being the racist, and now Cochran, running as a Republican, is running against the Tea Party in terms of how we flip the script, in terms of the Republicans and the Tea Party. Now we got the racists over there where the Tea Party is, and they weren't even around when slavery was being practiced and weren't even formed. The Tea Party was a single event in terms of the tea being dumped in the Boston Harbor prior to the Revolutionary War. But we now have the Tea Party coming up to challenge the Republican Party, and now they got to make them racist. And that's what Reverend Felder was saying. Part of it was his wanting to do repentance because he now felt that he had been used, and he was used. And he says that he thought, this guy is not a rocket scientist. If you listen to him, you don't get the impression this guy has any kind of a studied opinion about anything. He said, and I didn't know anything about McDaniel, Chris McDaniel. I thought he was a racist because they told us. And he said, I thought that I was doing the right thing by leading these persons to the polls and voting, and some other ministers were involved in it. And we thought we were doing something to head off a person that was in fact racist. So the guy asked him in the interview, well, what have you heard him say that was racist? He said, I haven't heard him say anything that was racist, but I was told this, and I believed, and I thought I was doing the right thing. Now, of course, part of it, I can't let Reverend Felder get off of it without some culpability, because I think there was something else that was in play as well, and that is that he had been promised, according to his report, he was promised $16,000, and after he had done the Judas work, is what it amounts to, they only paid him $300, and they gave him money to pass out in envelopes of $15 each for the voters, and they were actually paying for votes, which is why I'm watching what they do in Mississippi, because it's going to be interesting to see what happens to Cochran. But Cochran's not fit to be in, well, he's up there with the rest of them. So I guess that, if Rangel is still in there, then how can Cochran not be in there? But really, Cochran shouldn't be in the halls of the Congress, if we consider Congress to be the lawmaking body of government, and in making laws, then obviously Cochran is not fit to be in that particular body. But then again, Rangel was over the House Ways and Means Committee, and he was setting tax policy for the rest of the country, and he wasn't paying his own taxes, and had not done so for 17 years. But guess what? It was just because he had, forgot to do that which we all required to do by the 15th of April. It's not like it's not annualized, but you can forget these things if you are because you can be sloppy about your taxes if you are a member of Congress. But you try to be sloppy about your taxes and you're not a member of Congress, and see if the exception to the rule would apply to you.
I'm gonna hearing all this, I'm going to decide I'm going to go into politics. I want to get away with murder. I want to get away with not paying taxes and breaking every law that I just pass on everybody. Come on. Being righteous about it and pointing out their errors gets us nowhere. Why don't we just become part of the problem?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look, Atlas shrugged for that reason, because what eventually happens, and we're going to see, and we're seeing it happening more and more. That's why we have half the population right now that's feeding on the other half. Why is that? Because at some point in time, Atlas will shrug. And, why be the ones who is having their back used to ride, being ridden on, when they can ride on someone else's back? And when you have 51% doing that and only 49% of the person pulling their weight, then that experiment is over. And that's a danger that Dinesha pointed out in that film. But the illegality that's in place right now is so glaring. It's going to be interesting to see what they do about that. This is worse than is it worse? It's hard to say what's worse than what. It's all bad.
Well, they're going to have to force people to start going to work, because more people are going to become part of the system, and they're just going to have to randomly choose people who they're going to force at gunpoint, basically to perform the task of society. They're going to have to do that. So basically, we're going from a freer society, because I never believe we're totally free, but freer society we once had, to ultimately total servitude,
yes.
slavery.
Yeah, because that's the next step. In terms of we already tax slaves in the United States, and that maybe that will allow me to then transfer back into the third conversation, because to some extent the enslavement has already occurred, and it has happened behind our back, because I'm going to make a point here that I don't think that anyone else has. In fact, that no one else has made it. But I don't think it's a real radical point of view. Although it's a different point of view in terms of how we look at taxes. My view, and when I was doing my master's work in economics, I have to tell you, I'm in the back of the class and I'm doodling. I'm writing down the notes, but I'm also on the side doodling of how I'm seeing things, and where I'm looking at it in terms of the discussion about taxation, where he's up there talking about taxes are made to build the roads and things like that. I wasn't interested in that conversation, because I don't consider taxes to be that taxes is what happens when force is used. I don't think that's taxes. I think that's theft. You see, I think all transactions that involve an exchange of currency is a tax. You ever heard somebody say, for example, that's very taxing? They're talking about, wiping their brow because some labor is difficult, and they say that was very taxing. Well, you're out there in the field, and your labor is being taxed because it's taxing for you, but you're out there doing labor because you volunteer to do it. That's when you are being taxed. I don't think tax is what occurs when you are voluntarily involved in a currency exchange for the labor that's involved in it, because the labor is taxing. And what you're doing here is that you are involved in a voluntary transfer of wealth that you have for the labor that someone else put into the resource that was taxing on his part, and you're paying that which you had to go out and sweat for to get the money that you're paying him for his labor, but your labor also brought about a benefit. And because of the taxing labor, the labor being taxing in your case and the labor that was taxing in the other person's case, the two of you bring together the taxation and you transfer it. That's a different way of looking at taxes. So I don't think politicians are taxing us, because you can't tax somebody at the point of a gun. When you bring a gun into it, it stops being taxation and it becomes theft. Taxation is always about a voluntary transfer of currency for the taxation of labor, the taxing labor that's put into the production of a product. And when you look at what is transferred when you pay taxes to the quote unquote to the government, what do you get in return for it? In other words,
you don't get put in jail.
You'll get put in jail for it.
You don't get put in jail.
Or you get shot for it if you do not pay the taxes. You certainly are going to have some retribution. So what you're doing is not paying taxes. You're paying tribute.
And that's exactly what we're doing with all these countries. Several come to mind, but my favorite, we're paying tribute. I mean, why? We're not gaining anything from it.
No.
So
the roads have been built. And the seasoning of your wealth is always ongoing. We are subject to government theft in this country, and they like to hide it behind the idea of taxation, because it seems like it is in fact being done for your benefit. I'm saying that the government does not tax. The government steals. Taxation is a voluntary transfer of money, because you're getting something that you desire more than the money that you are giving for that which you're purchasing. They tell me that people stood in line. Somebody, I don't know if this is true or not, but one of my friends told me they stood in line at one store a week before some shoes came out that they wanted, and people in line a week before that occurred, and they taxed themselves to get the money to give, because someone else had taxed themselves to produce the product. And those two taxing agents, the purchaser and the producer, voluntarily came together to in fact trade the taxation that they had invested in the wealth, that on one hand in terms of the money, and on the other hand the product that was produced. In other words, taxation is not what we're calling it. Taxation is a voluntary transfer of money for something that you desire more than the money you have in your pocket. Okay, we got to get out of here. As always, we stayed with you an hour. Hope you will stay tuned to all the programs here at flinttalkradio.com. And don't forget, if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.